So what is actually that you are manufacturing? Are you manufacturing a shell and core, or you are manufacturing the whole product? And why?
So let's take like a massive step back. So Cuby is a full stack technology company that develops scalable hardware and software systems for processes in the new home construction space. Meaning like TLDR, really what we do is we design, we develop, we deploy mobile microfactories that manufacture and assemble homes.
Okay, so the customer for you is, who is it? Developers or?
Yeah, so our customer is generally a home builder developer, but it gets more interesting. Because we've productized the factory and said, hey, anyone can put this in their local market, the breadth of folks that we've seen that want what we're doing is it extends to family offices, private equity groups that do manufacturing and industrials.
Why don't you just sell the factories to folks and just get the royalties, subscriptions?
Well, that's kind of what we do. In
But
other
you said you
words,
wanted to own 50% and then...
so today is kind of what happens is we have, so each factory is a standalone special purpose vehicle. It's its own entity, its own business.
Do you, what are the, I love worst case scenarios, and I love thinking about like what can go wrong and why, and analyzing it. Like what can go wrong actually? That's a question.
So we're lucky that we're at the tail end of any technical risk. I think that's important for deep tech. How quickly can you decelerate the risk around the technical binary outcome? And can you do it in the most dollar per technical de-risking out there? It's a good ratio to look at.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Groundbreakers, where we reveal the stories behind the most successful founders and operators in AEC technology. From exits in the multiple hundreds of millions through to the struggles of building in a resilient industry, we've got you covered. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
Alex, Cuby, nice. Thanks for joining us on the day after Thanksgiving. So it looks like you didn't eat too much food. You're looking pretty healthy.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Pretty
I don't
and
feel
healthy,
but
that's what he meant.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me. Obviously a long time, big fan. Developed a pretty decent friendship. So excited to be here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. All right. So Alex, let's go into this. I think we have a bit to cover today. How did Cuby come to be?
Yeah, definitely not a linear path. I think a lot of entrepreneurship is not linear. I come from a real estate background, so I come from a real estate family. I've touched buildings my whole life, whether it was investing in them, developing them, etc. I've spent most of my career allocating capital toward real estate. My partner, Oleg, who I met about 4 years ago, he was designing his own headquarters. He had 200 engineers at the time, previous deep tech business, which is still profitable and operational today. He was trying to expand his headquarters, and he hired a developer and a general contractor to build that headquarters. Oleg's background is lean manufacturing. So Toyota's production system is his Bible. It's what he sleeps with under his bed. When he started working with a GC and the developer, he goes, my understanding and knowledge base is here on lean manufacturing, and this is a developer and a GC, the whole other end of the spectrum. Got so frustrated that he said he can apply his skill set to this industry, it being one of the biggest industries in the world. And he quickly looked around and said, I think the way things have been tried in industrialized construction are not correct. I have a different thesis, and it ended up being 3 theses, which we call the antithesis. I met him because I was looking for interesting ways to uplift my development capabilities, because I was running into an issue finding skilled labor in the US. We had about 1,000 units under development at the time, and I couldn't find enough general contractors and subcontractors to be able to execute on the projects we had going on. And that's when the first time I really felt this pressing need of, hey, young people don't want to be construction workers. That's why it's so expensive to build, is because there's not enough skilled labor, or at least one of the reasons. So I started interviewing a bunch of folks that, some of whom you've probably had on your podcast or have written about. but folks in the industrialized construction space. And for many reasons, I couldn't be a customer. And I'd like to think I'm not a conservative developer. I tried really hard, but there's solutions that just did not work. So when I met Oleg and he told me what he was working on, we came together and started building this. Now it's 4 years later and 400,000 engineering hours later, and we're now getting to commercial. We're getting commercial traction and obviously going to market in a meaningful way. So it's been a lot of fun. It's a hard problem, but excited about it.
Mm-hmm. So what is actually that you are manufacturing? Are you manufacturing shell and core, or you are manufacturing the whole product? And why?
Yeah, so let's take like a massive step back. So Cuby is a full stack technology company that develops scalable hardware and software systems for processes in the new home construction space. Meaning like TLDR, really what we do is we design, we develop, we deploy mobile microfactories that manufacture and assemble homes. But essentially our product is a mobile microfactory, and I'm happy to share and show you what that looks like. But basically we've created a factory in a box. We deploy that factory in a box near site. We then touch all aspects of a single family home from foundation to interior finishes. There's things that we truly manufacture from scratch, things that, taking in a raw input, things like windows, helical piers for the foundation, certain framing elements, non-structural enclosures of a home. So there's things that we produce as a product. Then there's things that we take in that we call them semi-products, right? Like the sheetrock behind you or a PEX pipe that's under you, in your plumbing. Those things are technically you can buy off the shelf, go to Home Depot, but you still want to prep them in advance so you don't have to do quote unquote dirty work on site. And then there's things that are truly off the shelf, like toilets, finishes, doors, kitchen cabinets, things that doesn't make sense to produce, but you can prep in some way. But all in all, we touch all those things inside of our mobile microfactory, palletize in about 35 stages what a single family home is, and we send it down the street last mile to the construction site where it's our unskilled labor that's assembling the home. The whole point of Cuby is to reduce skilled labor. If you reduce the skilled labor coefficient, then ultimately reduce labor hours to build a home, that's how you drive down costs above all else. So that's really our one KPI as a business.
Yeah. So you're like turnkey, right? So you're focusing on the full build all the way from day one. Does that extend to also like pre-construction, planning, design, then manufacture of the microfactory and house? Yep.
Yeah. So the way we think about it is we're a factory in a box. We, in essence, said differently, replace a general contractor and all the 22 different subcontractors involved in building a home. So we're like this magic screwdriver that a home builder can take advantage of to verticalize their operation. We started touching some horizontal aspects of building a home as well. So some site prep beyond just foundation to then interior finishes, some site prep, and we want to get further verticalized into that as well. But we also get involved in, like you said, the pre-design as well. Although we still like to produce a construction drawing set automatically, but have our partners go submit it via local architect, local engineer to that county. It's always better when someone local does it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. And so you mentioned that your product is the microfactory.
Yeah.
Just can you help me understand that? Because obviously we see the house and we're like, okay, it's built by Cuby. So is it not? What's the difference?
Okay. So the ultimate question we asked was, could we build more homes with fewer hands? We think that's fundamentally what's wrong. And obviously you talk a lot about what's going on with the construction industry, so we can skip some of the high level. The TLDR is there's literally not enough people in first world countries to go build homes that we need. And therefore there's a massive supply demand gap, which creates this affordability crisis that we all talk about and has been politicized now. But the way we're approaching the solution is really, we have three core understandings of what hasn't worked in industrialized construction. One, everyone has tried so hard to create this gigafactory approach. If we put up this $100 million gigafactory, it can churn millions of square feet worth of output, whether it's a volumetric box or it's a kit of parts, and then ultimately sell into the ecosystem and have some third party put it together. We look at that as an incorrect approach. So one of our antitheses was, okay, what if we actually bring the lean manufacturing process to the construction site, which we call decentralized manufacturing, which is...
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
Yeah. So one of the questions we asked ourselves was, could we build more homes with fewer hands? And like I said, it's because there's a massive labor shortage across first world countries of folks that actually want to go and swing hammers. There's not enough people to build, therefore we're not building enough, therefore it's very expensive to buy or rent a home. And we have this big crisis, obviously. There's a lot of folks that have tried to industrialize construction. We really had three fundamental ideas that are different, and we call them the antithesis. Yeah, so we had these three, we call them 3.5 moats, these three antitheses, and I'll get to the half in a second. But essentially, decentralized manufacturing is what we're trying to do. Everyone has tried to date an industrialized construction, spend $50 to $100 million on a gigafactory. That gigafactory then makes an entire room or parts of a room and ships it thousands of miles for some third party to put it together. We think the feedback loop of thousands of miles is not correct. You have to have some third party put together the product. The product might not go as it's intended to go on site, and then you have 1,000 miles in between in terms of communication, remaking that product, resending it if something goes wrong. But also, when you invest $50 to $100 million into a gigafactory, you're talking about millions of square feet of output that need to happen to pay back that initial capex or to cover your fixed costs. So instead, we said, why don't we bring the lean manufacturing process closer to site? So then we're servicing a smaller radius. Also, why don't we bring down the cost of launching a factory to a mere $10 to $12 million, something in that range? And we came up with this concept of a mobile microfactory. The idea is, why don't we have a bunch of distributed factories all over that service a smaller region? And that became thesis number one, and that's why our product is a mobile microfactory, and we can get into that more. And you'll put up on a screen what I mean by that. The second pillar for us, the second antithesis, was the following. A lot of folks try really hard to reinvent the space. When I say reinvent, they come up with new materials, they come up with new methodologies to build buildings. The end product ends up being something entirely different than what's built today or what's even allowed to be built. So we had this thesis of, let's not change the end product. Let's do on-site construction the way it's always been done, because of two reasons. One, incumbents are incredibly conservative, whether it's a general contractor, a home builder, etc. Folks in the space tend to be incredibly conservative creatures. The more you change, the further and harder it is to sell into that ecosystem. So that's one. And two, we didn't want to fight the regulatory red tape that exists around building buildings. It's a highly compliant space. It's highly regulated. There's 26,000 different zoning codes in the US. The more you change the end product, the more you introduce, call it novelty, the harder it is to do things by code, as of law, etc. So then you're just at the whim of waiting for certain regulation to change. So you become almost like a pharmaceutical company. So we said we're gonna build on site in a very traditional way, but we're gonna change information processes and we're gonna change the supply chain delivery mechanism. So again, thesis number two, don't change the end product. And thesis number three may be somewhat controversial, but it's kind of an obvious one to us. But no existing industrialized construction, whether it's this cohort, the last cohort, the cohort before this, no one's been cheaper than today's construction methodologies. And that's a big problem. There's folks that preach that they're faster. Great. There's carry cost savings. Folks preach that they have a higher end product. Awesome. But no one's ultimately on hard costs, meaning the cost physically to build, cheaper than existing construction, which is kind of an oxymoron, because all that a home builder is looking for is a cheaper way to build. So everyone preaches this narrative of, first we're going to be Tesla, Roadster, then eventually we'll hit critical scale and we become a Model 3, then everyone can adopt it. The industry doesn't work this way. It's the burn is too high. It's too intense of an industry. Like, you're just going to die before that ever happens. So we told ourselves we can't ever go to market unless we can build a home consistently on a self-cost basis to us of around $100 a foot in vertical cost being from foundation to interior finishes, which we've now done so. But really, we're building.
You say? What was the cost?
About
$1,000.
No, about $100 a foot.
Oh yeah, I was doing square meters around that. Okay, that was a lot here.
I wanted to pick up on one about the decentralized. What was the title? Decentralized
manufacturing. I mean, just a fancy word for saying, have a localized approach to manufacturing, servicing a smaller radius, lower capex to launch factories, quicker time to launch factories. So that's why we've containerized the factory. So when you think about our product is a set of containers that quickly deploy to form a factory. The reason why that's relevant is because, one, we figured out a way to do this incredibly cost effectively, but still having a full, robust factory that can do about 430,000 square feet of output. Think about 200 single family homes a year. We're not talking just like framing. We're talking end to end. We touch all aspects of a home, including the ability to build it on site using our unskilled labor. The second reason is, when you think about what our product is, it's a highly repeatable product, which means that each time it's the same process to set up that factory. It's not, oh, let me go find a warehouse in Boston, then one in Nevada. They're all different. So now I got to set up my machines differently. I got to test that process. It is the same repeatable process every single time. And it's important because we have software that sits on top of all the hardware. To the extent you're constantly changing the factory, you have to rewire your software to some capacity as well. So the whole point of a mobile microfactory is to be highly repeatable, is to go and service a smaller geographic radius. So for all those reasons, we think that's the approach, and we can get more into that.
So a few things here. So the third point was about the costs of building a home out of this microfactory. And I just wanted to get some clarity on that one. So you're saying that the product that can be built out of this microfactory is cheaper than the current kind of status quo?
Yes, but to understand where cost savings are coming from, it's not just like one thing. It's a combination of things layered on top of one another. That's kind of the whole point of Toyota's production system. Most of the cost savings are coming from a skilled labor reduction. If you look at the US, and honestly, if you look at most first world countries, even the UK, for every dollar that you spend, you're spending about 70% on skilled labor. The rest is materials, maybe 30.
They claim to be skilled.
Exactly. Ironically, it's a highly apprenticed space. Yeah, they claim to be skilled. You're hiring really shitty subcontractors end of the day because cost is going up and quality is going down. What we're saying is we're using machine/software enabled process that allows us to de-skill. That's kind of the whole point of lean manufacturing. So it's a combination of either making or prepping inputs that go into a home in a factory, but nearby to the construction site, palletizing those things, sending them last mile to the construction site, where we've also extended the lean manufacturing process on a construction site. And I'll explain that. Most folks think, hey, I'm going to put this process in a factory setting, and in quotes factory, because from what we're seeing, a lot of folks claim there's a lean manufacturing enabled process, but really it's off the shelf ABB robots doing one little tiny aspect. Or it's just skilled labor swinging a hammer in a warehouse not being rained on. So we haven't seen a lot of lean manufacturing at play, candidly. But one, it's essentially doing everything in an offsite manner, but then everyone forgets on-site, where the actual construction is happening, is always an uncontrollable. So how do you extend the lean manufacturing process on-site? So we've extended the software-enabled process onto a construction site. For example, auto-generated instructions on site. Every worker gets a phone. On the phone shows them exactly what to do for that build. But then on top of that, taking a step back, in typical construction, subcontractors, GCs, they bring their own tools, right? So they bring their own tools on site. It's kind of a crazy process, because if you think about, like, Toyota and their factory, imagine a worker showing up with their own screwdriver and their own, like, bend saw, whatever, right? That happens in construction today. So we said, look, this isn't going to work. So we send a 20-foot shipping container to each construction site where a home is being built. Inside of it is a bathroom shower locker. Inside of it is all the tools and equipment necessary at that stage to be used to put together those kit of parts for that unskilled labor, all tied together with the software. So, like, you want to extend the lean manufacturing process on site as well, but all to be using unskilled labor. That's how you reduce cost. And by unskilled, it's like a carpenter is by definition skilled. We want to be able to take, Martin, who's never swung a hammer, and say 2 months of training, you're going to be able to do this.
I was going to make this joke with Owen that could Owen even do it, but you turned it around on me before that.
Sorry, I don't know. Maybe I'm sure you can.
I would honestly be a very good litmus test, because there's a reason I don't work on site in an office. So what did you mention? $100 a square foot? For what did that include?
So we always think about our self-costs. When we think about our self-cost, that means, let's use your imagination for a second. Mobile microfactory standing in Nevada, for example. So in Clark County, Nevada. So basically, let's imagine a factory, Clark County, Nevada. Okay, that factory for us, our mobile microfactory, is intended to service a 150-mile radius. That means that at any given point, there's going to be 20 different homes being built at the same time within a 150-mile radius of that mobile microfactory. We always think about our self-cost at around $100 a foot. What does that include? That's the COGS, the labor hours associated offsite in the mobile microfactory to produce that specified quantity of kit of parts associated to that home. That's 2, the on-site labor hours to put together that kit of parts into a home. And it's 3, the literal materials used. We want that to be around $100 a foot. Then we upcharge to a home builder, an end-to-end solution. The home builder basically hires us and says, you're the GC or the subcontractor. I want a home. This is the home. Go put it together for me. Go build it. We generally think about the market the following way. If in Clark County, the average cost to build is, say, $152 a foot, we're going to try to discount that by 10, 20%. And that's enough for a home builder to say, you know what? I'm going to go this route, not what I've been doing. So the factory would sell to him at, say, $140 a foot, a turnkey solution. The delta is that $40 spread. There's obviously some other costs baked in, but just so you understand that the economics for our factory are incredibly compelling. And I'll talk about a real one. So we have one that's launching in Nevada. It's about $11.8 million all in for that factory. That's not just
how much? Sorry, 11 million.
11.8. So let's round it to 12 million. That factory is $12 million to launch, which, by the way, in factory world is a joke. That is a rounding error. That's already a feat in its own. We're talking about that's not just that includes not just capex. That's working capital for several months. That's land prep, because all we need to do is get 4 acres of land. We pour a concrete pad. Factory goes up. That's all the soft costs. So that's fully turnkey. Okay, so about $11.8 million. That factory is going to ramp up with time, but ultimately ramp up to about 430,000 square feet of output. There's always a downtime coefficient you assume with a factory, et cetera. But all this to say, so the factory, 11.8 million to launch, and then it'll do about 50 to 60 million in top line. The payback on that factory is 4 years if you're all equity, unlevered through cash flows. Those are incredibly compelling economics. Any lender, for any private equity group, et cetera. And our business model is predicated on the fact that we're here to copy and paste hundreds of factories. That's literally our business model. We're not interested in being a developer. We're not interested, or at least for now, we're not interested in being, we don't want to go compete with local incumbents in their markets. So what we do is we say, look, you want a factory, you want this magic screwdriver, you want this factory in a box, we're going to partner. Each factory is a standalone SPV. You can buy into it. We'll contribute skin in the game. We now are, for simplicity's sake, we're 50-50 partners sharing in the economics. We also participate in running the factory and licensing it. So we take a fee as part of the P&L expense in the factory. That's how we make money today. With time, as cost of capital goes down, we want to launch our own factories. With time, once we launch our own factories, we want to build our own homes. But it's a 10-year plan tied to cost of capital. That's what most venture-backed companies in this space get wrong, is they use venture capital for things that venture capital should not be used for. So we very much tied our go-to-market to that.
He's quite difficult to interview because he's answering all of the questions I kind of come.
Sorry.
Shall we wrap up then?
Sorry. I don't mean to do your job.
No, it's all good. All good. Alex, what the last point that you mentioned, that you are not doing it as a typical venture capital kind of model, that's where companies go wrong. Can you go back to it and rephrase it again? What did you mean?
So I think venture is a necessary evil, and we believe venture and their cost of capital should be used for R&D. So when you're in the early inception of engineering for a solution, that's when venture comes in handy, because cheaper cost of capital deems you too risky. The problem, I think, in this category, and there's been a lot of deaths of companies, right? There's a big graveyard, and I think there's more to come. I think the issue being is a lot of folks, haven't arbitraged how to do engineering efficiently, but 2, they use venture for too long, to the point where that cost of capital will never return back. So what I mean by that is, venture works for R&D. It works until you get to a certain point where you feel like you're commercially viable. But then if you stay on venture, buying equipment, buying real estate, if you're a venture-backed company, those returns can't ever blend to venture returns. So companies in this ecosystem have to get really smart about project finance, meaning other forms of debt, eventually private equity. And you have to set up the business model that way to be able to take that cost of capital in. But on top of that, we talked about this earlier offline. This is a really hard engineering problem. It truly is. Like I told you, we spent about 400,000 engineering hours to date to get to a TRL of 8, 9 being like commercially copying and pasting like full scale. We were only able to do that raising minimal venture, minimal meaning like in typical deep tech now you see these $50 to $100 million rounds. We were able to do this because we arbitraged Eastern European talent, meaning the cost of engineering for us has been 7 to 10x more efficient. And that's been a huge unlock. Not everyone can do that. It's really hard. It takes coming culturally from the place you're arbing from. 2, you can't ever outsource innovation. So my partner Oleg, everything is still in his head and someone is executing what comes out of his head. So those 2 things need to be at play if you can ever do that.
Very good. You showed us a picture before, Alex, and you mentioned it earlier about this this idea of unskilled labor being able to carry out the work. I guess the discussions we have on here and speaking to people in industry, this labor shortage issue is huge. So unskilled people carrying out works in like a Cuby microfactory, how do you attract those people to come and work for a company and do something like Cuby?
Yeah, so I'm going to work at it backwards. So our goal is to put up 275 mobile microfactories over the next decade or so. It's a very different mentality to go do one versus like even building. So 50% of our factory is proprietary to us, the machines that we build. So imagine you building a machine. It's a very different mindset day 0 to say that needs to be replicated nonstop over the course of 10 years. So you're constantly driving down those machines to ensure that unskilled labor can use them. So each one of our mobile microfactories employs about 265 people. That's a combination of on the factory floor in 2 shifts. That's a combination of general and administrative folks. And then there's about 160 folks that are in the field assembling in different shifts. The math works out to about 20 different single family homes within a radius of 150 miles for unskilled people on site in 2 shifts. It's 160. Then the rest is in the factory in different shifts. But the idea is 260 people is not a little amount. But it's little if you talk about unskilled folks. 260 is a lot of construction workers, but when you take away and say 75% of those are unskilled, the equation becomes a lot easier. For our first set of factories that we're commercially binding to launch with our partners, we're lucky because the markets we've identified and our partners' relationships are meaningful enough for us to very easily choose from a pool of folks. And I'll talk through a live example. One of our first commercial deployments that we can talk about is headed to Nevada, one of the most underserved housing markets in the US. And our partners happen to be part of an organization that has about 55,000 veterans in it, because 1 in 20 folks in Nevada is a veteran. We're going to be able to choose from a pool of veterans that need jobs to be able to employ them. So our job there is a bit easier. With time, though, I think that obviously reputation, paying a bit more than standard, all of that is going to come into play. Hopefully folks want to work for us, but it's not something we can answer unless we hit that critical scale. I will say though, there's 90 different factory projects that are multi-billion-dollar projects happening in the US, right? Like things like the Micron factory, Samsung factory, TSMC, etc. Those factories need to employ thousands of people. So just for context, 260 is not crazy to build 200 homes a year fully turnkey.
So 75% unskilled and 25 maybe skilled or skilled to a degree. Can you tell us how do you think about the composition of the labor in the factory, like a little bit more? So I guess there will be someone who has to have programming skills, perhaps, or some. No,
not necessarily. So one thing that we don't talk about enough, but one thing we've solved for that's incredibly interesting, and I'll I'll actually send you something you can put up, like an org chart for the factory.
Mhm.
But essentially, the way we think about it is anytime you have labor that's asphyxiated to a specific task, whether it be offsite or onsite, the problem there becomes is if you lose demand for offtake, you have to now fire, or you can't fire folks because they're responsible for executing a specific task. If you can't let folks go and scale down, you have too many fixed costs, all of a sudden you're in the red because you don't have
Mhm.
enough demand. The way we thought about that is we don't want any task or any labor that's asphyxiated to a specific task. For us, anyone in the factory or on site is constantly interchanging between tasks. Software is sending them distribution saying, hey, go to station 26A, do task 16D, and it's showing them in Unreal Engine what to do, but they're constantly interchanging between tasks. So that's a very important point. So to answer your question, we're trying to de-skill as much as we can. And if there are specific roles, like I'll give you a good example. Like we have 5 drivers that are constantly distributing the stages. Obviously, someone that is running around the factory floor is not going to be a driver, right? So there's always going to be like fixed amount of drivers you have to retain if your demand falls. But for the most part, majority of that volume of, call it, dollar spend is associated with folks that can interchange. So they're not skilled. They take 2 months max of training. So if you let them go, you can rehire. 2 months of training, you're good to go.
Good. So you mentioned a little bit on this, but I just wanted to reiterate. So you have, let's say, $12 million factory in Nevada employing 265 people. How many units do they have to do in a year to kind of stay afloat?
75 homes.
75 homes. Okay, so the customer for you is, who is it? Developers or?
Yeah, so our customer is generally a home builder developer, but it gets more interesting. Because we've productized the factory and said, hey, anyone can put this in their local market, the breadth of folks that we've seen that want what we're doing is it extends to family offices, private equity groups that do manufacturing and industrials, because what we're saying is you can have this thing in your market. You don't have to be a home builder. We'll run it for you. So it becomes a really profitable unit level endeavor. Because look, it's not hard to underwrite that, hey, you pick any market in the US, there's thousands of homes that need to be built, meaning there's off-takers. And who we're really trying to service as off-takers are small to medium-sized home builders. As you guys have seen covering the space for a long time, everyone is always, shooting the gun, trying to go after the top 10 production home builders. The problem there is although, they suffer from the same inefficiencies, they have a band-aid called scale. They build 50 to 60,000 homes a year. Therefore, their costs are so cheap that they don't really need help. They like to experiment, but what happens if you work with, say, we'll use a specific example. There's groups that have worked with Lennar. They can't deliver, and Lennar goes, shit, I'm not gonna do this again. And all of a sudden, they've just killed your business. So we don't think the best market to go after is even the top 20 production home builders. We think the more interesting piece of the pie is the other demographic that builds 50% of the US market, which are small to medium-sized home builders, highly fragmented. They're the ones that need help competing with the big production home builders. So we hope to enter a market and service the 10 Bob Smiths that build 20 homes a year that are consistently going to offtake from the MMF. But today, the way we're choosing partners are ones that are embedded customers. So in Nevada is a good example of our partner. They're a developer that happens to own 6,000 acres of land in Nevada. That means that they tomorrow could go unlock 2,000 to 3,000 single-family homes. So they're investing in our factory, and they're going to, so to say, smoke their own supply. So we don't need other customers in that case. We have an embedded de-risked situation where we put up a factory, and they're consistently incentivized to offtake from it. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so this is a very concentrated customer, but as you were saying, if you're planning to, that's okay. If you're planning to work with John Smiths as well, then what's the like a typical, because they need to build 75 to be profitable. Okay. So like how many plots on the same site are the same usually in the US or in the areas that you want to work in? Because I can imagine that some sites can have 150 the same units, some sites can have 12 perhaps. So does it take, is that a relevant factor for you or completely not at all?
It's not relevant necessarily. So one distinction to make: a mobile microfactory, it can but does not need to launch on a site where, say, like Howard Hughes is building 10,000 homes over the next 20 years. It can. That would be an ideal setting, and we're talking to a group in Arizona right now where that would be the case. They own 2,300 acres of land. They would be looking to just consistently, keep building across that different master plan development. But that's not the case, or it doesn't need to be the case. Many times we can just launch on some random 4 acres of land, as long as there's demand within 150 miles, which is a pretty far pool to choose from. And it's not always the case where the group that invests in our factory is the one building just for themselves. They might take half the demand. The other half could be third parties that are doing 20 homes here, another third party that's doing 10 homes here, etc. So it doesn't have to be concentrated demand. Many times when we have folks building, one distinction is we're not just building the same, volumetric box over and over again. We've essentially standardized parts that go into a home, which means that the way they come together can form hundreds of permutations of what a home is. So one home being built can be entirely different from the next home being built, which means that we don't have a standardized community that's being built. It could be like A, B, C, D, E, F floor plans for that developer, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, yeah. So it's not like just straight, literally out of a factory, like the same car 50,000 times.
We just want to build homes that are being built traditionally on site without skilled labor. So this becomes a really interesting equation around information processes and becoming the best procurement supply chain company in the world.
What's the resistance, Alex, typically for? Because I know you mentioned like your second point was about I can't remember the term you used, but about how
the most
conservative
demographic base,
the
sales cycle.
Yeah, what's what do people like? You approach a developer and you say, "Well, I'm microfactoring." They're like, "Holy shit, what the hell is this?" Like it can be quite scary.
So we don't do any marketing or outbound at the moment. Right now, we have our first of a kind up and running. So our first mobile microfactory scaled down version up and running. We have a manufacturing facility that builds the machines. We're in a good position, and we have our first commercial contract signed that once executed, meaning once up and running, makes us profitable, just given our arbitrage and call it burn. We don't need to look around. We don't need to go sell right now. We just need to execute on this live one in Nevada, which is contractually binding. Like we're all hands on deck executing there. Once it's up and running and I can host Martin and Owen for dinner inside that mobile microfactory, that is the sales cycle. Once folks can look at our T12, the P&L, look at the homes being built out of it, that becomes ultimately the sales cycle. That being said, we don't market, we don't sell, but we get inbound every 20, 30 minutes on some days where folks are like, hey, I need this thing in Australia. I'm a GC. What does it take? How much does it cost? What does your contract look like? I do those calls maybe 20 times a week, even though we're not even ready to go, scalably commercialize this yet, where we can output, when one day we will, 20 factories per year. But we constantly get demand because we've productized the factory. We say to folks, you can have this in your market. And it becomes very easy to folks to understand, hey, as long as I can sign off and de-risk what a home is, how it looks like, the fact that it's code compliant, then I can imagine that if there was a manufacturing facility next door, this is what would happen in terms of building that home. So there's no, and like you say, there's no throw up into what we do. The only thing we get ever, if folks aren't down, is, hey, I want to be the second or third. I just don't want to be a guinea pig. But ultimately, we get folks that bring on their construction folks on the call, their head of development. They bring on third-party consultants. We're able to pass all diligence. Once folks understand what we're doing and how conservative it actually is, and in line with what they're doing today, there's usually like general buy-in. The lack of buy-in is just not wanting to be second or third. Or sorry, not wanting to be first, wanting to be second or third. And that's just a risk profile game.
So I just wanted to confirm we're definitely taking this invite for the dinner or lunch in Nevada.
Yeah, would love to host you. Q1 2026.
Yes, and how to see it before that. But what about the variety of the designs? How are you constrained in terms of like what can you build out of the factory?
So one important thing to understand is, by definition, construction today, the way it's done, traditional construction, the thing that hasn't evolved for a very long time, is inherently a one-off every single time. That's what makes it challenging. That's what makes it highly, unrepeatable, highly uncontrollable, is the fact that it's by design a one-off project every time. When you industrialize construction, you're inherently moving away from customization a little bit. The ultimate uncustomization to me is like volumetric modular. You build an entire box, and that's all you're constrained to is this box. You might change 1, 2, or 3, but you're really limited to that box.
Mhm.
We're like, I would say, traditional construction and a little bit of prefab. We really think that we're traditional construction with manufacturing near site, but we're constrained by things like a 10 by 20 foot grid, for example. I'm constrained if Martin wants a 50-foot ceiling for some reason, or if Owen wants a curved living room. We're constrained by that. But when you talk about production home builders and what they're building, we can 99% of times back into that same home. We can do different sizes, different layouts, different finishes, but it's ultimately going to be more constrained than traditional construction.
Mhm. Why it hasn't been done before? Where people-
people have tried.
Yeah.
By the
I
way,
would
Alex, I think it's also important to say that where the term MMF comes from,
mobile microfactory.
and
Awful.
how protected that word is.
We have a trademark on mobile microfactory. Look, Oleg and I don't really care that much so long as it works. We're pretty simple creatures. We don't look around. We don't necessarily believe in IP. If someone can do what we're doing, then they should do it, and we'll go work for them. This is inherently a very hard problem, but we like to think that we're the first to come up with a on-site or near-site solution of this caliber that's end-to-end beyond just say framing. Yeah, I mean, we think it needs to be this way. And Martin, to answer your question, I mean, people have been trying to industrialize construction since the 50s. If you look at the Soviet Union, you're talking about precast concrete blocks that would be erected. I lived in one when I was, I moved to the US when I was 8. And since then, we've had things like Levittown and a bunch of folks have tried. And I would say in the last 20 years, probably concentrated more in the last decade, there's been a ton of startups that venture has been backing that have been saying they're going to create a better, more efficient way to construct. The problem is venture doesn't really understand this industry too well. There's a lot of layers to the onion, a lot of things to peel back. For example, I'll use a concrete example. You can have the most innovative developer in the world. That developer answers to a lender. That lender is incredibly conservative. That lender can't pay up front for a volumetric box because the way that traditional construction works is you're drawing on a debt schedule, an equity schedule. So you can't pay up front. So that becomes a big problem. So you got to build around that. There's all these little layers that you have to unlock to ultimately get to a solution. You have to innovate within this confined box. If you're building, and you guys have a separate podcast about space and space robotics. If you're building in that sector, amazing. You just got to go from A to B and figure a solution out, and it's unconstrained. Whereas here, there's so many parameters and constraints that force you to think within the box. But folks have tried, folks are trying. We think there's going to be a much bigger graveyard to come. And look, maybe it's not us that has the solution, but whoever ultimately does come up with a solution to building better will be one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll use that
I
for a
agree.
good short. What are other venture misconceptions
Ha 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 ha.
about the space?
Again, we'll go back to cost of capital. I don't think venture pushes their founders early enough and hard enough to think about alternative cost of capital and setting up a business that way. Like, for example, just the package we have out to project finance groups right now is, of caliber to some really institutional companies. A lot of folks early on can't pull that off, for example. So it takes a lot of work to unlock cheaper cost of capital, and it means setting up your business from day zero to think that way too.
Very good. Are you guys venture backed?
We are venture backed. We don't really announce fundraisers too publicly. We like to build in the shadows. If you've seen the stuff we've built, I think it's quite a lot. We're backed by institutional venture that's focused on deep tech and climate. We're finishing up our Series B right now. I don't think we'll ever raise more equity beyond this. We're also finishing, and hopefully will be done soon, a pretty big project finance vehicle to back the factories themselves.
What type of debt is it, this financing of the factory? What type of financing is it?
called project finance. So project finance is asset-backed financing. So it doesn't claw back to your operating business. There's no warrants. It's generally backing the viability of the individual unit level business plan, which for us is an individual MMF.
Very good. I picked up a few things from your article that was released by Paki.
Oh, Packy. The 15,000 word one. Packy's a legend.
Yeah. Do you know, so you mentioned that you had an ambition within 10 years to get to 275 MMFs, which
Correct.
produce 200 homes per year. And this
Yes.
equates to about 55,000 homes annually.
Yes.
Does the math check out? Hopefully. How does that compare to like what currently is being built in the US?
So essentially, this is kind of wild, Owen. So you bring that up. Even when we hit critical scale, at least in our heads, and then there's phase 2 and phase 3 to a master plan that we can discuss. But phase 1 is getting as much distribution as we can. That's putting up 275 mobile microfactories. Like you said, on an annual basis, that means that our factories will be spitting out about 55,000 homes a year. Here's how big the industry is, just so your audience understands. The biggest production home builders build around 40 to 60,000 homes a year, the ones that are established. What's interesting about that is in the US, we only build like 900K to 1.2 million homes a year. But there's like 2 to 3x worth of demand that can be absorbed. So that means that just on today's basis, if we build 55,000 homes a year, we're less than like, what is that? Less than 1.5% of the market. That's of what's being built, not what can be absorbed. So if you factor in what can actually be absorbed, even at critical scale, we're like 1% of the market. That's crazy how big the market is, and that's just the US, and that's just for single family homes.
Have we talked about the time to build the home out of the factory versus?
We're aiming for about 60 days from foundation to interior finishes, and we want our bottleneck to be not us, but the inspector that shows up. There's about 5 inspection processes that happen when building a home, so we want the bottleneck to be a third party that has to show up.
How does that compare to a typical process, all things considered, from like client has an idea and they go, right, I now have finished my project and I can move in?
Well, we don't work direct to consumer. That's not what we do. That's not our business. Maybe one day, phase 3 of the master plan is one day we take a bit of offtake from our own factories with our own brand of homes one day, but that's far out.
Maybe I should relate more to like your developer customers then, right? Like, they think, okay, here's a plan. We want to go and build X thousand.
They can send us a PDF of an architectural drawing, and we translate that automatically to what the factory needs to do and adjust. Like, our design gets adjusted automatically. Sometimes we're plus minus 6 inches here, 6 inches there, just based on our grid, but we can most of the time back into it, but it happens fairly quickly. But when you talk about foundation to interior finish, like physical build, we want to be about 60 days.
You want to follow up on this, or can I, Owen?
I don't know. I suppose I don't know the US market enough, but I'm just curious to, does it slow down? Does it speed up the design process at all, not just necessarily the construction process on site?
Totally. We can produce pretty quickly construction drawing sets. We just don't want to submit them. We still want our partner's local architect, local engineer to review and submit, because usually their names are recognizable by that county or that township. So there's some level of credibility there. But let's call it like we do 90% of the work from a pre-development perspective on the soft costs.
So I've got one about, so I know you're not in the UK, but maybe at some point, but I guess there is a similar analogy in the US, or maybe not, you can correct me. But here we've got, if someone wants to buy a house from a developer needs to have a structural warranty, 10-year warranty on the finished product. And all of the MMCs, so modern method of constructions type of construction ways of building, it's very difficult to get this sorted. Yours seems like it's like SMMC, super modern method. So is there a problem like that in the US as well, that some sort of accreditation that the product that will be built, it will be mortgageable, really?
Yeah, Martin, good question. I would actually argue the opposite. We deceptively look like traditional construction to the naked eye on site, and it's all done in stages on site. So the one thing you didn't ask, and it ties to your question, because the factory takes the function, like our entire process takes the function of the general contractor and the 22 different subcontractors, that means that we need to be, each MMF, its own standalone SPV, needs to be a licensed GC, licensed skilled trades around plumbing, electrical, etc. That doesn't mean that that person does that function. That means that there's one person carrying that license that checks a box while other folks do it, just from an accreditation perspective. In terms of warranties, because we use a lot of off-the-shelf non-proprietary things, the warranties go back to that manufacturer of that good. The things we do have to get our own warranties and insurance on are things that we make, things like windows, non-structural sandwich panels, like helical piers, like things like that, which we reinsure. But yes, we also have our own guarantees and warranties, same as any builder would by law.
Okay, should we go on to the master plan? I suppose I feel there's so much depth in this discussion that we could go to, but obviously we're constrained a little bit here. So, we've sort of talked about what you guys deliver and how, but it would be good to perhaps touch on the vision of like the future and where perhaps we see Cuby in the next 10 years or so.
Yeah. So the way to think about us, and I think you might have seen this in Patty's article, is think of like a chart, right? MMF growth goes like this, but cost of capital should decelerate down as well. So our cost of capital is our constraint. So today, because we don't want to use our balance sheet to launch factories, we have this joint venture model where we partner with local operators to launch factories like we're doing in Nevada. With time, though, we don't want to give up our economics. So as cost of capital gets cheaper, we'll launch our own factories without partners. And for now, we just want to reduce risk. So we say, look, you can invest in the factory, we'll share the economics. And further, we reduce risk by not using our balance sheet, but also because that partner ends up being the off-taker. So there's no speculation around who will be the customer of that factory. With time, as things start to accelerate, we can launch our own without using our balance sheet, but using cheaper cost of capital, aka project finance. But also with kind of more traction, there's no speculation around offtake either, because then Bob Smith, the home builder, we can start to accelerate, conversion on those folks. Phase one is just about those two things, getting 275 of these things as distribution out there. Phase two is about us eventually launching our own procurement supply chain arm, meaning like we want to be our own distributor of our own materials direct from manufacturer to the factory. Each MMF consumes about 600 different SKUs of bill of materials. We eventually want to be sourcing and funneling those through our factories ourselves. That's a very easy 20% margin business right there. On top of that, we want to start PropCo. So over time, phase two is we want to be our own developer and take a bit offtake from each factory ourselves, also separate cost of capital. And phase three, way further out, is eventually we want to be a home builder too and sell direct to consumer or rent direct to consumer with time, because there's no reason we shouldn't be capturing the entire cycle of that value chain, from finding land, subdividing, zoning that land, which creates value with correct cost of capital, of course, not venture, and eventually off-taking directly from ourselves at that $100 a foot, not at that markup to someone else. So there's like a whole long plan, but it's going to take quite a lot of time.
How do you ensure or prevent that you will not end up like Katerra?
Yeah, because I think that's one of your points within your master plan. You refer to as reverse Katerra, huh?
Yeah. So look, I think staying incredibly focused is important. I think we have this, Oleg and I always joke, we send every like 3 days to each other. It's a picture of a cockroach he's holding like a Cuby backpack, the cockroach, like with a Cuby logo. It's like a backpack. But the idea is you want to be a cockroach in startups. You want to survive no matter what. You don't want to stretch yourself too thin. You want to stay extremely focused. You have to be able to survive. That's the most important thing to ultimately figure it out and get it right. So staying focused is important. Focusing on the right problems is important. So long as we can phase that master plan, like we know what our first kind of set of goals is, like we first just have to launch this commercially viable mobile microfactory in Nevada that's contractually binding with our partners and slowly go from there. While at the same time focused on infrastructure to create the Papa factory that will first do 8 factories per year, then 20.
Mm-hmm. What are I love worst case scenarios, and I love thinking about like what can go wrong and why, and analyzing it. Like what can go wrong? Actually, that's a question.
So we're lucky that we're at the tail end of any technical risk. I think that's important for deep tech. How quickly can you decelerate the risk around the technical binary outcome? And can you do it in the most dollar per technical de-risking out there? That's a good ratio to look at. We're at the tail end of that, so that feels good. That means that anything we're doing now is operational or execution risk rather than technical binary risk. So when we think about any risk, like you're saying, what could go wrong, it's all about execution risk, which has to always do with timing. And you do things in time before you die, right? You take in revenues before you die. So essentially, any of the risk is about executing, and executing is about time. So the goal is to make sure we deliver our non-first of a kind, meaning our first commercially viable mobile microfactory at the economics we're saying it's going to deliver. Obviously, things will go wrong, terribly wrong, and that's the definition of Toyota's production system, this concept called Kaizen, constant improvement. So we just have to adjust for those mistakes. We're lucky that our partners are understanding that they're a first mover, and we need to build the ship as it's sailing. So things will go wrong, can go wrong, and we just have to make sure that we're adaptable to those things going wrong.
Alex, I'm truly curious, because one of the huge competitive advantages, and we touched upon it earlier about how much engineering hours you've spent, is the fact that your whole R&D team is based in Eastern Europe. Obviously, that was intentional from the start. But do you think that building something like Cuby is possible without having a team based in where perhaps the labor is cheaper?
Do I think it's a competitive advantage?
Yeah. Do you think
Do you
that
think it's possible to build?
Like, say you didn't have that in mind and you said, okay, we're going to build it, I don't know, Western world.
No, I think a couple of things at play. I think cost would be impossible to get through the amount of that technical de-risking relative to how much you would have to raise at the highest octane dollars to ultimately get through that technical risk to get to commercialization. It's not just me theorizing. Like, that's exactly what happened with that graveyard of folks in this category. Is like, that's exactly what's happened. Is they ultimately couldn't get through to commercialization. In deep tech, that's called the valley of death. It's no different here. So long as you can arb that risk a little bit, and I wish. Look, maybe I wish Oleg and I had access to $50 to $100 million. Maybe things would go quicker. But the truth is, you can't speed up engineering with dollars necessarily. Sometimes problems are just hard, and can't control the time it takes to solve a problem, even with capital. So,
what's the cost of, say, a software developer in Belarus versus? And I asked this because obviously you mentioned earlier that most of the time and energy is in the software. So yeah, what's
3,500 to 4,500 a month versus let's call it 40 to 60K versus 250K, 175K, plus you're giving up a lot of equity. That compounds when you have 10 folks on the team.
And that's a very good salary over there. Very
good, yeah. People are very happy. Our team is great. There's also, in my opinion, a very different mindset. At least, like, look, I have my job between the split of responsibilities between Oleg and myself, and we have very complementary skill sets. My job is not to sit and invent stuff and make sure it gets executed and built. And I showed you some of the WhatsApps, every day that we get across in terms of things we're delivering. But there's, at least my understanding from Oleg, there's also a very different mindset of engineers in Eastern Europe, and this Eastern European mentality versus, PhD from Stanford that comes from, Endural. Is a very different mentality. That mentality I can attribute to the following. Our engineers, if there's a hole in a pipe, they're putting some blue water through it and seeing where the hole is. If you're a Stanford grad of some 3 PhDs, you're probably pulling out some detection device, running it through your computer, like running the data. There's like a more practical, get shit done attitude, I would say.
And the construction side is exactly like that.
It's the real world. It means you have to iterate incredibly quickly and you have to fail 49% of the time while getting 51% correct. Like literally all deep tech is you got to fail almost as much as you get things right, but you have to obviously tip the weight in favor of the things you get right. But it only is by like 1% in favor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
we all know that this is, perhaps it's no secret that it's cheaper to develop in places like Eastern Europe or Asia, wherever it might be. But it feels like not a lot of people take up the option.
It's not easy. A lot of things have to happen. So we were lucky because Oleg's previous business was built out of Eastern Europe. So he had access to all the infrastructure there. Also, him and I are both of Eastern European descent. It's a very different way to manage people. It's a different mentality, different culture. It doesn't work if you don't come from that culture. And then I would say like 2, you can't outsource IP. You can't just be someone non-technical that says all of a sudden I'm going to hire all these technical folks and tell them to take some idea and create it. It still has to be top-down vision from a very strong engineering CTO type mindset, which Oleg is incredibly good at what he does.
Okay, I wanted to go into go-to-market for a sec, if we can.
Yeah, for sure.
I know right now you're not actively searching for perhaps new customers, but to scale from 0 or perhaps 1 to 270 MMFs, and you have very defined plan for that. What are your thoughts at that point about go-to-market?
As soon as one thing I'll also say, I feel like a lot of folks try to run really, really quickly, and then they end up running too quickly and end up falling, right? You have to go slow to go fast. And I think what we're trying to do is stay focused on executing correctly on our first one. Beyond our first of a kind works, but it's scaled down. It's very different to do one with a customer, right? With different variables and conditions, etc. So the focus is making sure our first one is just singing. Once it's singing, and at the same time while we're setting that up, we're still constantly working on infrastructure of where and how we'll mass produce first 8 factories per year, then 20. Because remember, we build the factory, like that is our product. So we have to make sure that on the back end, we have the infrastructure to be able to do that. So we're working on that. So part of that is creating infrastructure, but then once our first one is singing, we can start signing more contracts. We're signing contracts in the background, just saying that the Kickstarter is a bit delayed. It's not today. There's no issue with demand. We're not seeing the product market fit from a demand perspective be an issue. It's really the constraint on us and when we want to move quickly. But like Martin, it's not easy to launch many factories, obviously. It's hard. That's why, the mentality of creating the right SOPs for launching factories, the way that we set them up, how they get set up, who sets them up, those are all standard operating procedures. So long as we can be highly operational and process oriented, we can do it. But it's, it's going to be a learning curve. It's hard. That's why we're doing it slowly. But from a product market perspective, we don't see an issue of actually getting the folks that will want these and offtake from them.
Why don't you just sell the factories to folks and just get the royalties, subscriptions?
Well, that's kind of what we do.
But you said you wanted to own 50% and then...
So today is kind of what happens is so each factory is a standalone special purpose vehicle. It's its own entity, its own business. Mm-hmm. In that business, it gets capitalized pro rata based on who capitalizes what, whether we're majority, a partner's majority. That's how you split pro rata the EBITDA, the cash flows from that factory. But baked within the expenses is our license and management fee, which is pretty hefty. We make a lot of money, very high margin when we do this, very high margin, because we don't borne any of the expenses. We just take a certain cut of any of the percentage of revenue, essentially, of that factory. Mm-hmm. You're asking a question of, well, 2 questions. One, if we just sold this to, Owen Drury, right, who has never run a factory ever, nor does he build homes, it becomes kind of a problem because it's a huge reputational risk. We have to ensure that this thing runs smoothly. Most of the folks that want these don't know how to run factories. They don't know our system. They can't fix things when things go wrong. We want to be the best in the world at running our own factory, building our own factory, setting up our own factory, etc. So that's why we stay on. The question is, why do we eventually want to own our own? Well, we want to capture all the GMV, not just a piece of it. And with time, our cost of capital can go down so much so that it makes sense to then invest the entirety of the sum into the factory to own it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
When will we see the first fully development by Cuby?
So we have a couple model units of homes being built across the US right now. So maybe within 6 months, I'll have you guys fly out and do a second video. You can take some pictures of houses and you'll be pleasantly surprised how like normal these houses are. There's nothing fundamentally so obscure about them or different than what any production home builder is building. But in terms of our MMF in Nevada outputting homes, that's going to be, Q1, it'll be sitting there. Around Q2, we'll probably start outputting homes of 2026.
Mm-hmm. I'm flying to Poland tonight, so I might take a bus and pop into Belarus and see.
You should. Honestly, we'd love to have you, our first of a kind to set up there. I showed it to you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
I just have a broader question. How do you think about being flexible in a thing? How do you think it is important? Is it important to be flexible in thinking when growing startup? And maybe why? And then we can relate to what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Folks always ask this, and maybe other folks have different perspectives. But to me, starting a company means you get really comfortable with your constant state being your equilibrium. Your equilibrium being like high stress, like that becomes your equilibrium point. Because I think building a business, you constantly are going through not like weekly or monthly highs and lows, it's like hourly. So it's like this, so then your equilibrium becomes this weird stress point.
Mm-hmm.
I think entrepreneurship a lot of times, especially in this category, is about being adaptable, flexible, and not rigid around your thinking. And like I said, you have to make a lot of mistakes very, very quickly and constantly. And so long as those mistakes are 49% and the things you get right are 51%, that's how you win. And it's just over the time that you can do that. So stay alive to get through that time as well.
The Roger Federer style.
Yeah, that's actually I remember that it was the commencement speech, right, where he said he only won like a small. Yeah, I remember that. Great.
Yeah,
exactly.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but people go check out it's a very famous quote.
I've got
Alex, I have one. One probably final one from me. Would be how you guys, because you're very strong and convicted with your thesis. And it seems to me you thought about like a lot of detail and a lot about Cuby. What's your process for this stuff? Is it a matter of trying and failing, deep thinking, previous experience?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think, like I said, Oleg and I bring different things to the table. I understand the industry intimately. Like I've, throughout my career, invested billions of dollars into real estate across different asset classes. I understand the other end of it. I don't think I'm just another technology person that's building for a space that, I think there's a problem and needs a solution. I want the solution to exist for my own personal selfish reasons. I want to be able to build and develop things at the most effective cost basis. That's one. So combination of experience. On Oleg's end, it's launching factories and spending 20 years in deep tech, specifically lean manufacturing. So it's knowing how to avoid certain mistakes, how to move quickly, how to scale deep tech teams, how to manage large teams, how to build processes, operations, etc. But like we have a thesis, but that thesis it's a 1,000-foot thesis, which means that on a micro level, things are constantly adjusting and changing. We're testing, refining. We'll sometimes spend, 4,000 engineering hours on a machine, but because unskilled labor can't use it or it keeps breaking or something, we'll throw it in the trash and restart. So there's definitely a macro thesis, like the 3 things I identified for you, those will remain constant because we believe in them. But all the sub things under there, those will evolve and change. Part of the beauty of what we're doing is we like to think it's a flexible system. We have no proprietary supply chain. No bill of materials in our process is proprietary. That's incredibly important. If you look at 3D printing, they all have their own like composite of concrete and you have to buy from them. And like to us, it's a supply chain problem. The best GC in the world, in theory, will be the best information process system in the world, the best supply chain procurement system in the world. So you can't have a proprietary supply chain. we have a system that can change. Like, our entire system sits on international building code. Think of it as a railroad. However, that system can slightly tweak to those 26,000 different zoning codes. That means you naturally have to be a flexible system inherently based on what you're building. But thematically, like we believe in our thesis, it'll be very hard for it to change at this point, but the micro adjustments will continue happening.
Very nice. I like it. So my last one would be, so you must have spoken with quite a few venture capital people investing or trying to invest in your business. What are their misconceptions about the space? Or what are they trying to advise you incorrectly, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think there's been a lot of excitement in the space. I think just more thematically stepping back, post-COVID, I think deep tech has become this accelerated force because folks are interested again in solving real-world problems, which candidly, I think Silicon Valley should be focused on these big moonshot ideas because that's what it is. If you want to do other asset classes, go do private equity, go do real estate, etc. I think venture is about binary outcomes. So it's been a positive tailwind that deep tech has become this really exciting category. How do we solve housing, energy, go to the moon again? Like all those longevity, et cetera, like all those big categories are now exciting. Whereas before they were considered really hard categories while everyone was investing in like B2B software, right? And whatnot, and direct to consumer brands. So that's been a positive tailwind. On the other end of the spectrum, this has been a category filled with a lot of, RIP and a big graveyard. So there's inherent kind of, oh, this is too hard. No one will be able to solve this. This is too expensive. This is just, no one will get it right. This is too similar to this, etc. I think for us, the biggest challenge has been is we are so vertically integrated from building our own hardware to the entire software stack built in-house. There's no third-party software that we use, for example. So the reason why Packy had to write 15,000 words is because no venture investor has the time to keep peeling back to ultimately be like, holy crap, what Cuby is doing is insane. This is insane in a positive way. So it's been a lot of education and a lot of having to keep folks focused in their diligence process. It's been a lot of that. So we've had to overcompensate with materials, overcompensate with building relationships. Like it's less cookie cutter than like, here's the software, here's the ARR, here's the 12 months, we're going to do this, here's like a new product rolling out. It's way less systematized than that.
Yeah. I think he even said it was like the hardest article he's ever written about you guys.
Packy's a very special individual. He spent a lot of time reading books leading up to writing our article that had tangentially to do with what we're doing. He's read like Ford's biography all the way to like Toyota's production system, things tangential. So he did a wonderful job. It's a really good piece I would allude to if anyone wants to learn more about what we're doing.
100%. Brilliant way to end it. Cool. Alex, could you tell people where they could find out more about you?
Yeah, we love chatting. My LinkedIn or Oleg's LinkedIn, always happy to take a DM, and our website, cubytechnologies.com, is a good starting point. The forum usually gets Oleg and I CC'd as well. If you submit through the submission link on that forum. Would love to chat with anyone. Appreciate the work you guys are doing in making sure that construction industry gets pushed forward and showing folks what's out there and being built.
Thank you.